When it comes to Marvel comic books in 2016, there are a lot of consensus that are going on at the moment that are vastly influencing people's opinions on not just the comic books, but also the TV shows, the films, and the various animated series. And some of these consensus are exclusive to each industry, and some of them are kind of line-wide throughout all of Marvel Entertainment. And some of these consensus are the very reason why Civil War II picked a really, really bad time to even exist and to come out. And these consensus are that a lot of people are really annoyed by the fact that Marvel is constantly homogenizing all their properties to be like the movies. Everything has to visually resemble the films. They sometimes even have to change the character's pre-established history to fit the movies. They change races. They change the character's voice so that it fits in with the films better. And then there are other consensus, like how people are fucking sick of events, how Marvel constantly, sets up a new status quo every year, and then before that status quo even has a time to really cool off, to really actually build itself up, they break it down and they introduce a completely new status quo, which also doesn't get any time to get built up and then gets broken down. And then there's the superhero versus superhero thing. It's especially egregious because last year we had a Charles Soule and Lionel Yu Secret Wars Civil War miniseries that was kind of a sequel to the original Secret Wars, not Secret Wars, I mean Civil War, kind of, and then we had the Civil War movie that also came out this year, and a lot of people, when they saw Civil War II was coming out, a lot of that stuff I just mentioned about homogenizing Marvel, how they have to fit into the movies. A lot of people really lost their shit over the fact that we're getting Civil War in the comic books and in the movies simultaneously. And yeah, there are a lot of things that color people's perception of Marvel Entertainment these days. And some of them are very, very much true, and a lot of them I don't feel like they are. In fact, reading a lot of the Marvel comic books these days, from Doctor Strange to Bendis' Iron Man, to even this, to Miss Marvel, to Miles Morales, Marvel is actually doing some really damn good stuff. In fact, I think this is the best time to be a Marvel reader ever since Infinity kind of screwed over Marvel now. Because if you remember, Marvel now started out really, really damn strong, and it was really strong for about 8 to 10 months, and then Infinity kind of came in. And Infinity was good in retrospect, but after that, the Marvel Universe just kind of lost its way for a few years. But now I feel like that both at Marvel and at DC, there's lots of good stuff that's being released. And may God, Satan, Chuck Norris, and all the other mighty gods of mythology strike me down right now. But I would count this as one of the good Marvel storylines you should read. And bear in mind, I am one of those guys who is completely frustrated with the recycling of Civil War, who's annoyed with the fact that everything has to be like the fucking Marvel movies, and not just Marvel properties, how Hollywood is in this mentality of everything has to copy the fucking Marvel movies in both tone, aesthetics, and like building a cinematic universe. It's really fucking annoying, and I really, really hate it. And, I am kind of sick of events as well, and so I'm not an exception to the rule for these various, fan and critic consensus that exist for Marvel Entertainment that's going on these days. However, I decided to be fair for once, and just kind of put all this bullshit aside and just read Civil War II as its own piece. Like, forget about my own biases, my own frustrations with, the Marvel movies and the climate they've created in entertainment, period, and just sit down and read Civil War II on its own merits. And I feel like this is the best version of the Civil War storyline that we've ever gotten, because it does a couple things really, really well. It realizes the fact that if you're going to have superheroes fight one another, you cannot keep them perfectly of sound mind and body. If you do, all you're going to do is make them look like fucking douchebags, because realistically, if everyone is 100% okay, everyone is 100% logical, and everyone is 100% in character, they would not fight. There would be a discussion that would last maybe a few pages, and that would be the end of the storyline. They would reach a consensus, and that's it. So that's one of the big things that people, I feel like, have to realize, that if you're going to have superheroes fight one another, both sides have to be equally right, but also equally wrong. And when you write a story like that, characters are inevitably going to go to extremes, and they're going to do things that you might not expect them to do always. This is the only way I feel like you can make a superhero versus superhero story work that would actually be a true superhero versus superhero story, and not just a discussion that lasts a couple pages before everybody just agrees on a universally acceptable answer. And the other thing is that it doesn't throw anybody under the bus. Like I said, everybody is equally right and equally wrong by the end of this, and neither side of this conflict gets thrown under the bus. And this is where a lot of the other Civil War storylines failed. This is where the original failed, the Charles Soule quasi-sequel thing failed, and even where the movie failed, because the original Civil War kind of flip-flopped. If you just read the main Civil War series by Mark Millar, you would just have this kind of weird situation where Captain America is clearly the good guy and Iron Man are the evil extremist scumbags. But then if you read the tie-ins, sometimes Iron Man would be the good guy and sometimes Captain America would blatantly be the extremist, and so it was just a big mess. And then the Charles Soule comic just kind of built on the fact that everyone's just kind of a shithead, but not for the right reasons, the way Civil War II does. And then Civil War, the movie, it tries to keep everybody sane and logical, and so when characters are just acting like completely deplorable shitheads to one another, lying to each other, backstabbing one another, it just makes them look a lot worse, because there's no emotional or even logical context for why a perfectly sound Black Widow is all of a sudden, offended by the fact that Iron Man is angry with her after she helps cripple Rhodey. And so she's angry at Iron Man when Iron Man is the guy who probably should have all the reason in the world to punch her fucking teeth out. And so that's just one example off the top of my head where the movie, I don't know what the fuck the movie was trying to do. Is the movie trying to keep everybody logical, or is it trying to make everybody too emotional? Because I feel like it fails at both of those camps, and Civil War II majoritively avoids the issue. So the basic premise, as you probably already know, is the fact that a new Inhuman has shown up and he can see into the future. He can calculate the probabilities that a terrorist is going to blow up Capitol Hill, and then we have two sides of the discussion on superheroes with Iron Man and Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel wants to use this ability to predict the future to stop threats from happening so they can limit civilian casualties. Iron Man doesn't want to use this kind of technology because he realizes that predicting the future in comic books is really fucking faulty, and it also eliminates the whole concept of free choice. And Tony Stark is a futurist. He's a guy who likes to talk about the future, likes to think about what the future is going to be and help shape the future. But he also feels like free will is an important factor in shaping the future. And so if you just have this kind of profiling system where everybody's actions are going to be predicted, nobody really has free will. Everybody is just kind of a slave to something that they might do and they might not do, and that just kind of eliminates free will, and it creates kind of like this situation where somebody who cures cancer is maybe gonna possibly in an alternate timeline gonna become a terrorist, and because of this slight possibility, they're gonna get sent to prison, and so we're never gonna get a cure for cancer. It's kind of like that thing. And Rhodey's death is what kind of kicks off what I like to call the emotional instability in Iron Man and Captain Marvel. Rhodey's death. Rhodey was very close with both of them. He was Carol Danvers' boyfriend, and he was Tony Stark's, brother from another mother. And so when they both die, you have these two grieving superheroes that are caught in this really intense debate amongst the superhero community about what to do. And so when you just combine these two factors and the fact that this is Carol Danvers and Tony Stark we're talking about, especially Tony, you have the situation where everybody is kind of trying to overcompensate for their own grief. Everybody is trying a bit too hard and with a bit too much passion to correct the mistakes of the past and make sure that they don't happen. And they both do questionable things, but they're never really extreme. The worst thing Tony ever does is I don't know, he kidnaps Ulysses from the Inhuman stronghold, and Carol, does the whole profiling thing. And they both do some kind of morally ambiguous things, but the book never goes overboard with it. There's no moment where Tony, suddenly just starts murdering people like a psychopath, and there's no moment where Carol Danvers just starts throwing everybody into prison just because she can throw everybody into prison. Everybody is fucking flawed, but everybody also has a point, and everybody is also wrong. And This lends itself to some really good discussions, especially if you consider like the tie-ins, like Miss Marvel, where Miss Marvel initially kind of starts out on the side of Carol Danvers, but then she realizes that she doesn't really like this whole idea of everybody's destiny, lives being calculated by some inhuman, and she kind of turns away from Captain Marvel and goes over to Iron Man's side. And Miles Morales probably has one of the best subplots as well, where, and you've already probably seen this from the spoilers, there's like a potential future vision where Miles Morales apparently kills Captain America. Now, this is really fucking good for a couple reasons, because we just had the reveal that Captain America is being manipulated by Red Skull. And so him killing Captain America is not really a bad thing, but nobody knows that Captain America is actually an agent for the Red Skull, and so when you kill Captain America, you're kind of fucked. It's like when you kill Superman. Like, if you kill Superman, every motherfucking superhero in the world, and probably a fair few supervillains, are gonna be after your ass because you killed fucking Superman, or in this case, Captain America. And Miles and Captain America have this really great moment near the end where they go to the spot where they see Captain America die. And they just stand there. They just talk to one another and they're like, hey man. And then they just talk about how they came to Capitol Hill to prove everybody wrong, that the future is not predestined, that we don't have to kill each other just because some kind of potential future says that we do, and that we do have true free choice. And I'm not going to say the ending of the final issue, and I've already spoiled a bit more than I wanted to spoil, but I really like the ending because the ending does not throw anybody under the bus. There's no ending where Carol and Tony just mutually say, I was completely wrong, you were completely right, and that's the end of the whole discussion. Like, no. The point of the whole storyline is that they were both right, but they were also both wrong, and they kind of went overboard with pushing each other's buttons, and it ended in a bit of a situation that could have been avoided, but like I said, I feel like the story does a really good job of creating good emotional and logical context for why everybody is both right and wrong at the same time, and for how this conflict would even happen, and why everybody would go a bit overboard in their respective ideologies because of Rhodey's death. They want to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else ever again, and they're both going a bit too far in their respective directions. And I really like the scene with Carol at the end where she doesn't get thrown under the bus, because I fully expected somebody to get thrown under the bus in this storyline, because that's what happened in the original Civil War comic book, where, Captain America just agrees that Tony Stark was always right, and that just kind of went nowhere. And then Charles Soule did this weird thing in his miniseries for Secret Wars where everybody loses their powers, and so the answer is take the superheroes' powers away and they're not going to be able to do anything, which is weird. I don't even know what the fuck he was trying to say with that. And then the Civil War movie just doesn't end. Like, that movie has no fucking resolution to anything in its storyline. But this does feel like a good resolution. This does settle the conflict in a way that I really, really like. And honestly, I wish this was the movie. I feel like this could very easily fit into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because Bendis does have a very Robert Downey Jr. way of writing Iron Man, and I guess that influences how this would turn out. But I feel like this could have made a really good movie. I feel like you could have saved Civil War storyline for later. You just give Captain America a proper fucking threequel, because the Bucky storyline has fuck all with the side of jack shit to do with the Sokovia Accords, goddammit, Feige. But if you just gave Cap a proper threequel, his own threequel, and you just left Civil War, this one, for later on once you've established more heroes like Black Panther, Carol Danvers, and all these other people, you could have very easily made this into a movie, and I think it would have been a really, really damn good one. It certainly would have made a far more compelling film, I think, than whatever we got in the actual Civil War movie. So, yeah, is this one of the best Marvel events that they've done in recent years? I'm going to say yes. I would say that this, Secret Wars, and Fear Itself are the three Marvel events that you should definitely check out. I feel like this is also the best version of the Civil War storyline that they've done thus far. I feel like if you're going to do superheroes versus superhero stories, this is going to be controversial, and Batman vs. Superman kind of should be the examples of how you do it. I feel like we finally kind of ironed out the kinks when it comes to like superhero versus superhero storylines, and these two storylines I just mentioned should be used as kind of the templates for that. And that's just saying those two things is going to make this a very controversial video. I fully expect a lot of people to fucking hate this one. But honestly, I dug this storyline. I don't think it's an amazing comic book by any stretch of the imagination, but this is really, really damn good as far as I'm concerned. Like, this is like a solid 7.5 out of 10 if I gave it like a numerical fucking score like everybody else does. It's not going to set the world on fire, but when it comes to the various versions of the Civil War storyline that we have, this is probably the best one you could possibly ask for. And it also helps the fact that Bendis and Panzor, these guys did like the Iron Man run when like the new Marvel Universe was created post Secret Wars. And the fact that Panzor actually draws all of this comic book and all of it looks absolutely fantastic, that's a really damn good thing. And this thing was plagued by delays. I know there was only supposed to be like 7 issues, and then they upgraded to 8. Because it's a fucking event, and it's a Marvel event, so there's gonna be big delays. And so that is something to take into account. And there's also the fact that those consensus that I talked about how people are just kind of sick of the MCU, they're sick of events, of superhero versus superheroes, they're sick of Marvel constantly recycling these 3 trends over and over and over again. And if you're one of those people who fervently cannot let go of that stuff, who cannot even temporarily just forget about that shit and maybe read a comic book on its own terms, and if the politics surrounding this comic book really annoy you, then you're going to hate this no matter what. You're either not going to buy it, or you're going to buy it and you're going to hate it anyway, so yeah. But as a guy who loathes the homogenization of Marvel, how am I going to say this? If you're someone who dislikes the fact that the MCU is fucking infecting everything like the horrible parasitic virus that it is, if you're someone who's sick of events and someone who's sick kind of the Civil War storyline, take this from a guy who knows your pain, who knows how you feel, and please give this a good chance. I feel like if you just let go of the stupid fucking politics surrounding the storyline, I feel like you're going to be able to find a comic book that you're going to reasonably enjoy. And, I really don't think this is that bad. And trust me, like I said, I've torn down shit all the time with incredible fervor. And if this really was bad, in my opinion, I would rip it to fucking shreds and tell it to you like it is. So, yeah, if you can let go of the external politics surrounding this storyline, I think you're in for a good ride, and I think you're going to find one of the better events that we've had in the past, like 5 or 6 years, probably.